So I'm really happy to have Rui Franco with us from Lisbon, from the Lisbon City Council. He's a city councillor responsible for housing and urbanism. But Rui has been very active in the last years in social economy and all kinds of ways of creating inclusive economic structures, using existing economic flows to actually feed into local economic initiatives or local infrastructure. So I would like to maybe first just to ask how many of you are in relations, or how many of you are actually involved in social economy, social and solidarity economy in any ways? 1, 2. Okay, not bad. So thanks a lot. So it means that we might need actually a bit of an introduction to why we talk about social economy. We heard today and yesterday from Barcelona, from Berlin, from different cities. We talked about that there are, let's say, ambitions from the side of municipalities to facilitate the creation of cooperatives, we talked about community land trust, of different kinds of forms of social economy and cooperative economy. But why would this be? This would be my first question to Rui. Why is it important for a city, for a European city, to give more space for the social and solidarity economy?
Well, good afternoon. I'll try to enjoy this time in a honest, frank, and free way, and hoping that we can have a more open discussion on the subject. So the main perception is that what is known as a free market often doesn't promote a fair society, a fair economy. Market is not concerned about everybody has a right to a decent living, different housing, decent job, decent quality of life for their families, and so on. Especially in dense, big enough cities, they are often facing like a huge concentration of capital and production. But as often as they are economically stronger than the average of countries, they also produce pockets of persistent cross-generation pockets of poverty. And the liberal system is even less equipped to distribute wealth in rich cities between large companies and poverty communities. So a bit of the background, the context of Lisbon and how this whole policy has been built. 12 years ago, the civic movement, which I'm part of and elected by, and having a strong role and being needed to create a majority of governance in the City Council of Lisbon, in a very open and participatory way, we developed this strategy where one of the outputs was that urban planning needs to understand this incapacity of the present economic system to distribute wealth, and this needs to be translated into city council governance strategical documents, like typically what we call like the city master plan. So this is nowadays identified as a European good practice by the Eurobact program. For those who know, we call it the BIP-ZIP strategy, and it has the story has 4 steps. It took years to get where we are now. But we looked at the city data and started to map in 2 different perspectives. So the first, more scientific or more statistically based data, like on income, on school level, school attendancy of the population, environmental indicators, transport indicators, quality of building and housing. But mainly social, economic, environmental, and what we call urban indicators. And we scientifically demonstrated that the deficits against the average of the city, they almost 100% of the times overlaps. So in an urban capital city, typically in Europe, which on the urban planning is very distinct from what you would find in Asia or in North America, low education, unemployment, low quality of construction, low levels of public equipment, they always happened in a very territorialized way. And families, citizens trapped in this poverty cycle very hardly are able to come out. We then did something, a different approach, which was we've run mobilizing and engaging, so involving local organizations, like from tenants unions, residents unions, local cultural organizations, and so on. We've run a very strong survey on people's perception on what do they believe that it was missing on the place where they lived. And so we created a very, and scientifically and mathematically, we've again demonstrated that the genetics, the DNA of the causes of poverty group together in very specific areas of the city and by different profiles or thematics. All this results in what we call like the social, economical, urban fracture of the city. And it was then submitted to the City Council and then to the City Assembly, and is formally part of the Lisbon Master Plan as what we call not the deprived districts, but what we call as the priority intervention territories of the city. So people engaged on this, so it's always about indicators and perception indicators against the average of the city, where people knew that if they demonstrated that they have a problem, it's not about the problem, it's about the priority of the government to focus their investments and their activity on addressing the problems. So we have this priority intervention areas mapping of the city, together with a building zoning of the map and other more urban traditional maps of the Lisbon Master Plan. We have this economical map as a law. Secondly, and this is the second step of this strategy, we believe that, and we've started to demonstrate it and now is fully understood, that and we've been discussing this this whole 2 days of this conference, which especially in deprived communities, there was a huge mistrust. There was a lack of trust between the communities and the established administration. And to run any successful local development strategy, it was and it is fundamental to do it with the people, with the empowering and letting them have a central role on the definition and the implementation of their own community development. And to do so, and this was still during the economical crisis, we had a very limited city budget, but we believe that a small budget could make a big difference. And we focused that on, of course, funding local projects, but with two specific ways. One is that we would only fund projects which are run by local organizations, necessarily in partnership. So we've pushed organizations at the local level, at the neighborhood level, to work together and not separated from one another. Second is that the public, let's call it the open call for this funding, would evaluate, would classify the applications, the proposals, against how much do they represent directly the interest of the citizens themselves. So basically pushing organizations to have local assemblies, to have discussions, to engage and to involve directly the citizens. And they would be classified by this and by how directly they address the causes of their own specific poverty in that specific district, on both levels that I was telling you about the the statistical deficits and the perception of the people. This is crucial about the success on gaining their trust and their engagement, but they are often not the same. Just to give an example, or two examples. When a specific district has an unemployment rate 10 times fold the average of the city, people say that there are problems, but they wouldn't identify the lack of, the low education levels as a cause of their own lack of employment. Or in neighborhoods which are mainly public housing, compared with let's say illegal settlements. On the illegal settlements where people have lower housing conditions, but they build them themselves, so there's a strong sense of ownership over their houses. Although the houses have way less quality, they wouldn't point out the quality of the houses as a problem, while at the public housing neighborhoods, although the houses are much better, they would say that the houses are not good enough. So there's a difference between perception and concrete, formal, directly comparable data. But any project to be funded, or any successful local development strategy needs to understand these two dimensions and in an intelligent way to combine that, to combine the expectations of the perception with addressing at the same time the concrete causes of, let's say, unemployment, as an example. So the result after 10 years of this program, which every year from 2009, if I'm not mistaken, funds limited projects, like 1 year cycle projects, with a budget always up to 50,000 euros, so very limited funding. It has proven two major things. One is that the money implemented by local organizations is way more effective than a top-down approach. Just to give an example, in average, these hundreds of projects that have been funded have created, in average, 2 permanent job positions, while including like years after the funded initial project, while I don't know anywhere in Europe where such a small funding has such a big impact. The other one, which was, to be very honest, my own political goal when we drafted this program, was to empower, to capacitate these organizations to make them able to have a more significant role on the later steps of the strategy. Should I continue?
Can you give us a few examples, for example? So this was a funding program oriented to problematic neighborhoods. At least a few organizations in partnership should apply, so they should not compete against each other, but they should collaborate. So they should create kind of a tissue, a local tissue in a neighborhood. What kind of initiatives did you found? What are they? And how could you actually, in a way, guarantee their sustainability on a longer term?
The rest of the story will tell part of the answer, but sorry, just to give a couple of concrete examples. In the 1973, 100 families got together, got some municipal land and some technical support and built their own neighborhood. Those houses with a public loan for the construction. Often these cooperatives bankrupt, they didn't pay back all the debts, some did, some didn't. Anyway, 40 years after, many of these initiatives had no papers at all, so that there was no property registration. A lot of the bureaucracy had to be dealt with the city itself. There was not a trust relationship between the residents, the families, the residents' union and the municipality. And this program, by giving them the possibility of hiring their own architects, which understood the city's bureaucracy, let's call it in plain English, but at the same time, in a very close and responding to what the residents wanted, because they were the clients, they were the ones paying, we were able, with 50,000 euros, to completely legalize the property, and then after, with continuation, to dramatically improve the urban infrastructure, public space, and so on, and to legalize the whole property system of those houses, which allow them to compete in the system, or to be included in the system where they can have loans to do renovation, because they had no property, they could do no mortgages to improve, they could not let the houses to be inherited by their children, they couldn't sell it, they couldn't, and so something as simple as property documents was, for this neighborhood, the priority, and 50,000 euros was enough for them to do it themselves. We're talking about, I don't want to exaggerate, but I'm definitely over 300 or 500 successful funded projects with concrete outcomes, thousands of activities. There's books, I know at least 10 different PhDs, theses running, done at all over the world around just about this specific program of Lisbon. Well, you have books, you have catalogs, you have exhibitions, you have a huge amount of information online. Like if you put BIPZIP, which is the Portuguese acronym for priority intervention neighborhoods or zones, BIP-ZIP. But then this was just the beginning of the story. The political goal was, in a moment of crisis, to reinforce, to empower local organizations to be able to take a bigger role in the city management and democracy, and having more political power, more political intervention at the city scale.
Can I also tell you, like when I'm in Lisbon, the places that are BIPZIP funded and I like to frequent, just to make it a bit more tangible for the audience, a cooperative hotel and hostel that, for example, uses tourist money, and I know that we will talk about tourism a bit more, uses tourist money to give local jobs, to bring people out of poverty, to actually give jobs to people who never in their lives had a proper job. And this is all with actually channeling tourist money into some meaningful local economic activity, or community kitchens, restaurants, which are actually really fancy, but they're all, you know,
that very same cooperative people. Had another BIPZIP funded project in the very beginning, which was as simple as this. And if some of those here know about, well, you're all living in cities, you have an idea on how administration works. But imagine the, well, typically a city has like at least like 1/3 of their civil servants working on collecting rubbish, the trash, the rubbish that we produce every day, and we leave it in the rubbish bin outside, and on the other, and on the next day, the next morning, the city is clean and waiting for us to use it. I would use the word empower the invisible. And so imagine that this same cultural cooperative being funded by this small scheme that I was telling you about, and then by the income produced by the tourists staying there at this cooperative kind of hotel. They hired a music conductor, teacher, and they engaged dozens of rubbish civil servants collectors, like people who work cleaning the city every day. And they have this amazing orchestra that is playing everywhere in the world. We helped them to give a concert at the UNESCO conference a couple of weeks ago, where they basically play high quality music on a drum orchestra, dressed with their professional uniform, playing drums on the rubbish bins. This was a 50,000 euros project, which has been then self-sufficient for more than 10 years, running for more than 10 years, and which changed the whole perception from the city on these special, very relevant city workers, and at the same time gave them a sense of pride on themselves on using these uniforms. Just to give very small example, it's thousands of examples like this, but just to have a couple of stories. Then in those neighborhoods, on this priority neighborhood, intervention neighborhoods, where we could find that there was a maturity of this local organizations partnerships, and all the cities started to have some budget, because then we very successfully, in a progressive policy, we were able to, and also with the help of tourism, which is not just about the bad impact, it's also about the income that is bringing to the city. We were able to start to have millions available to fund what we call like the local development strategies. We also did some that we applying for very relevant European fundings, but where instead of a top-down approach where the city decides just to build something or to do like an urban space renovation or whatever, we started to create in these neighborhoods what we call these local co-governance structures, known as GABIP, which is basically a local office, a local co-governance office structure, where not the city, but the collective of the city, the local district, the residents union, all the different organizations, like already empowered and trained by several BIPSI projects, for them to run themselves with a one-to-one vote to design the local development plan and to manage directly, on an equal stand basis, millions of euros of investment to tackle like real problems with real solutions. Like when I mean real, I'm not saying that the drumming of the rubbish people, it's not as relevant, but I mean like with more direct impact in a short number of years. So this was the first step of the strategy, and more recently, and I've prepared some kind of small leaflet in English, so it's just one half page, well, A5 size. Just please keep them. You don't need to read them now, but please keep our contacts and a short description on what this organization is about. So the European Union in 2013, under this perspective of the most effective way to tackle basically urban poverty, and there were people from Urbact and others involved on on the designing of this EU regulation 1303 from 2013, so just before the present programming period. They've changed and extended the leader program, for those who know, like the bottom-up co-decision, at least in most, that this is what was meant to be. I know that in Hungary it didn't always work exactly that way, but I will tell a small story about it. So learning from the previous leader program, and for those who know the rural funding history, creating this new European program called community-led local development, not only for rural areas, but also for fisheries-coastal communities, but also for the very first time for urban environments, for urban context. So in Lisbon, we've understood this, and this started to happen in the very beginning of 2015 as a huge opportunity to do something that we were already understanding, that it would be the need for the next empowering step of this BIP-ZIP strategy, which was to go another level and to create an organization of a kind of a federation of all these organizations in Lisbon, and for the city not to run a top-down local development strategy, but for the local development strategy of Lisbon, focus on this priority, let's say, deprived neighborhoods, to be developed by this new federation of local organizations. And the very relevant, so if you go and read that EU regulation, which is of course published in all languages, including Hungarian, of course, so it's a very easy to understand EU regulation. Promoted the creation of this bottom-up organizations where there are very legal limits for the public participation, for the public institutions' role. So they should be in, but they need to have a limited power. Also for commercial, like the writing is no specific group of interest can have a majority position. This includes public institutions, imagine like a certain commercial lobby or whatever. But specifically on urban environments is designed for urban poverty, bottom-up strategies with focus on employment, education, and inclusion. Those are the three pillars of CLLD. In some countries, this was distorted, and they are not complying with the EU regulation. There are countries like Hungary, where the municipalities, one way or the other, have the absolute stake, and there are not even real bottom-up organizations involved, and that happens, and I've studied in Hungary, but also in some parts of Italy and other places in Europe. The main stake here is not just about drafting strategies or discussing or whatever, is about these organizations to have a transferred power from EU institutions and from national and regional states, authorities, on running directly EU funding, okay? So what's happening in Lisbon and what could happen if people would be honest and comply with the EU regulation is that the group, the federations, or the consortiums, or the federations of local organizations would be themselves deciding how to manage directly all the ERDF and ESF, European Regional funding, and the ESF is European Social Fund. ERDF is European Regional Development Fund. ESF is European Social Funds. So main pillars of the cohesion policy. And that's what we did in Lisbon. So that's the description of this almost 200 organizations presently have one equal vote in this organization. So the city has one vote out of 200. We even decided on the statutes of the association that no institution can be elected for the same position, like president of the board of the network, for more than 2 mandates, for more than 2 political terms, and the political term in our case is 2 years. So I've been representing the city. I was elected twice, so I'm now on my 3rd year as president of this organization, but in 1 year I cannot apply, so someone else, some other institution would need to be there, and all bodies like the board and the fiscal and the assembly always need to have a balance between public, not-for-profit, and eventually some profit. But in our case, 99% or 90-something% is not-for-profit local organizations. So this is where we got. We've been, of course, facing. This is again, like I said, I believe yesterday on another conference. I'm not saying this is easy. That this was easier than it would be in Hungary or in some other countries. This was, and it still is, a permanent fight, because we're talking about decentralizing power from traditional forms of state to bottom-up local organizations empowerment. So this is not easy. There will always be resistances to this, but we've been able to step by step to get closer and closer to the global idea of fully empower the local organizations up to this level.
So just to a little bit understand the connection between the different elements, different programs that you've built up. So in the beginning you told us about the BIPSI program, which is targeted funding into the most poor areas in order to build networks, build initiatives that will be sustainable, that create jobs with inclusion. Out of this understanding what is the local context, who are the local organizations, you built up the GABIP, the local offices that are actually managing, building local plans, so managing practically the framework of how money and development should be oriented in the neighborhood, which also includes local organizations, includes some city officials and other organizations. And bringing this to the city level, you actually invited all these organizations that are involved, so now it's like a 200 organizations, to be part of a big governance network that is deciding about how certain funding, how certain funds should be spent on the city level. Now, I think it's a very impressive trajectory where one thing is built on the other. Did you have this whole vision in the beginning, or how was this built up organically, you know, building one step on the other? Because what we see in many cities is that it's great to have very good initiatives, it's great to have good policies, but if you cannot build on this at the next level, they will remain isolated, they will become marginal, they will be discontinued. So it's a very essential thing to be able to build, you know, long-term strategy, build one step on the other, and have this kind of really holistic vision on the level of the city.
Well, yeah, of course, the organizations and stories as people, we grew old, we get more mature, we learn, we enlarge ourselves, and we have a direction. Institutions have enjoy the possibility of not needing to die, but they necessarily need to adapt and to change. Nowadays, we are already working on the internationalization of this, and we are already creating an European network of organizations doing like this, and have direct influence, or aiming and lobbying to strengthen the level of EU resources appointed to CLLD's funding across Europe, and we are doing so as much as we can, and what is projected for the next programming period is more strict meaning that it's more clear that money cannot be spent by states in different investments like football stadiums, like someone was saying, and it happened. So the European Commission makes every year a conference where we gather all the CLLD rural coast fisheries and urban being developed around Europe. And last year, this evaluation conference was held in, I think you spell it, Dior, here in Hungary. and of course I was there, and I don't know what the adjective to use, but maybe I don't need adjectives. After what you've heard, imagine that this conference was proposed and organized by of course by the European Commission, but then locally by the Hungarian state at this football stadium funded by ERDF. I couldn't save myself from criticizing, well, people who do stuff like this needs to be confronted, and that's what happened then. I think I lost the track, but nowadays we are establishing also with the support of Urbact, a network of cities around Europe, cross-learning the challenges and the potentials of urban CLLDs across Europe. There are very few, let's be honest, successful urban CLLDs organizations, but there are some, and we are together to help others to do the same and to enjoy the same potential and possibilities of the scheme. And we would be happy. I mean, the group of cities we are doing it to help any Hungarian bottom-up group and municipalities that would like to do the same. Still, what we are doing now, and I don't know how well it would be good to have some time for discussion, but I have a couple of examples more concretely on how such an organization can innovate on creating new forms of effective economic and financial capture and instruments to fund such a strategy.
I would just, before you start, I would just like to say that this is a general preoccupation of us, or many people who actually move people a little bit between cities, that many European cities are facing the problem and the opportunities of tourism, for example. And Lisbon, of course, as you said, profited a lot from tourism, but also got a lot of pressure, especially on housing, on real estate, from tourism. And very few cities have actually structures where we could say, for example, that let's use this hotel because we know that the profit of this hotel actually goes into local initiatives. Let's use this, let's go to this restaurant because we know that this actually helps people with disabilities, people with different kinds of abilities. There's very small amount of places where we can say that we go there, we spend public or non-public money, and we know that the way we spend this money has a very positive impact, very positive social impact. So I think it's very important to think about tourism and think about existing money flows in a way that they will actually create a positive impact. And I think, if I'm correct, we see an attempt for this.
Yes, I'm an architect myself, so I will just start by a very simple example, and then I will move to that one. On urban planning for those, and I've heard from a lot of interventions that there are a lot of urban planners in this conference. There's a juridical term in urban planning in several countries called per equation. I don't know if the word is understandable. Per equation, which is used in urban planning, and I'm also looking there at Florian, because this, I believe he would enjoy this this example, which is, let's say, the city decides to develop a new, well, to promote a new urban development with roads, infrastructure, schools, housing, whatever. And the ground had previous owners which don't match with the new urban structure. And so that the plan can rationally plan more and less profitable land uses, and not to have the opposition of the previous private owners to be indifferent for them if the end of this building ground will be a green park or a high-rise building, which have, of course, huge different rates of profit. In urban planning, we use this per equation, meaning that we would make like an average sale price of all the building ground and then divide it proportionally, not by the specific use of each square meter in the end of the plan, but by all with the same, by all previous owners with the same price per square meter. Everybody understands this. Now imagine an economic situation where with housing, with long-term residential housing rental, and which has typically a profit rate around 5%, meaning like per year the owner gets 5% of the global value of the property. While if he chooses to exploit the same very property with no physical changes on Airbnb, he can easily get a rate profit of 30%. Okay? This is the real cause of situations like you find in Berlin, in Lisbon, in Barcelona, where it's hard to convince someone by law, by whatever instruments you might try, to have people to choose a responsible exploitation of the property, having on long-term a low profit rate rental. Because people, well, imagine yourself, you can get 3,000 euros a month out of your property or 300. What do? You tend to get 3,000 or to choose for the 3,000. So instead of imagine, this is under discussion. This is a proposal of mine that is under strong political discussion in Lisbon. We made some steps to make this possible successfully, including for the municipality to have the right, which we didn't by law, to have a power to license or not any unit, and to be able to have local rules for the licensing process. So if we understand that the problem, like on urban planning, is about the huge gap of profit levels between one option and the other, if it would be indifferent for the owner, the use that his flat would have, he would have no pressure to choose one or the other. It would be irrelevant. So imagine a system where the city defines quotas. Let's say, in this district, you cannot have more than 20% short-term rentals out of the units, the housing units available. Imagine that you define that long-term rental to be affordable cannot be more, let's imagine, more than 10 euros per square meter, just to use like German standards. Okay? So quotas, prices, and then if we understand that Airbnb itself works amazingly well, that's why it is so successful, and because it has insurances, because they take care of all the paperwork, tenants and tourists in this case, and owners don't need to care. They will take care about everything. They collect the payment. They pay automatically, directly. So there's a very, very limited risks. If there's a damage to the house, they will go there and repair it themselves and so on. So if the license to the platforms would depend on them first, accepting to manage directly, which for them would be more profit, to have a bigger share of the market, because then again it's understanding the market laws and doing them to create social balance and instead of social unbalance. That's what, by definition, it would have happened. So imposing Airbnb and others that they would need to exploit both short and long term, that they would need to respect quotas themselves. So within its district, let's say 20%, to practice at the maximum this, let's say 10 euros per square meter per month on long-term rentals. And if we also understand that the dynamic of the market is better managed by them than by us, public organizations, and then the final rule is they would collect 3,000 to 1. They would have, like, imagine 30% profit, and they would even better manage which flats are more profitable doing short term and which which flats are more not so designed for short-term, but better equipped, let's say, for family rentals. So I believe that they manage this better than we would. And if they themselves apply this per equation, meaning that every owner would get the average payment per square meter of rental, the problem would be solved. And we would be basically funding affordable housing in the free market with free options of the owners by the capturing value for the foreign touristic higher capacity or higher financial capacity, because prices would also go up because the share of the market. So any economist in the room, test yourselves this equation. Second, if
Airbnb plays the game,
they will,
and they don't hide half of the.
We already have the data. A lot of countries had this problem. I was even helping Vienna to sort this, but we were able to negotiate a contract with Airbnb a couple of years ago, where they do charge already the touristical tax, and they accepted the Portuguese and the local law saying that they share real time all the data with the city of Lisbon. Lisbon is the only city I know that was able to do this, but having broken their resistance, we are helping other cities to do the same, following exactly the same writing of the contract.
Are you saying that with an agreement with Airbnb or whichever organization, you would set a unified price for, let's say, all long-term rentals? Which means, let's say, person A has a flat which is sunny and silent and well located and has a nice view, whereas the other apartment for long-term rent is dark, it's loud, it's in a bad street, and they would get the same price when they give it for long-term rent?
Yes, with two buts. First, the selection procedure, the selection competition procedure for what we call affordable rental is done by the city. Okay, so the platform would select and appoint who gets the contract to ensure that there's no discrimination. Second, in Lisbon, the legal requirements of the quality of a house to be able to be rented is very high. Okay, so there's not a huge discrepancy between the houses that can be formally rented on quality, and then those who would have, well, and some would still be happening in the market. When we talk about affordable housing, we are targeting the ones that nowadays have, with an average salary, cannot find a rent proportional in that. With the very rich people, they don't have problems. They can rent by whatever prices they want. They don't need Airbnb in the middle. That's not the issue. Very expensive houses, they would never the owners would never accept for them to be managed through a platform like Airbnb. That's not, they wouldn't be there. Let's face it.
Okay, let me put it that way. I'm not convinced, but maybe, there are just not enough details, because even if we say it's one building and one apartment looking to the south and the other apartment looking to the north, on a normal market, when I want to buy that apartment, let's say as an investor to let it out, then I will just have to pay a different price. So,
but the owner wouldn't get the 10 euros. The owner would get 20. They would get the average income from both revenues.
So it's the tenant who pays the same, no matter what is the quality of the apartment.
Per equation means I, as a tourist, would pay 3,000 euros a month on short-term rental, or on a list of daily rentals to the same house. The long-term would pay 400. Okay, the owner would always get something like 1,000 in the middle. Does this make sense? So the prices of the houses, the ones that I get, is not what people are paying. Is the average.
So you cluster homes in a way that it assures that there's a percentage that goes on short term, and another percentage that goes for long term, which means that at least you save that percentage for the long term, because right now
I'm sorry not to
everything is
have a
on short
diagram
term.
to show that one, but I will show another equivalent approach that might help to understand. But it's basically cross-subsidizing. So the state is not funding it, but is making the private system to balance itself, to share different levels of profit on an average profit level within privates. That's we have other approaches that are an alternative and complementary approaches that are being discussed, but this is one. And in the end, I just want to provoke your discussion about it. I don't want to convince you about it. That's not my role here. So there's another very specific project, let's call it this way, which has a citywide impact, and it's all about to use again the market system and the financial system to make again a rebalance social economic fabric of the city, instead of having a market creating deeper and deeper unbalances. So as the truth is on a cooperation between the city of Lisbon, the CLLD network I was telling you about, and at least at the beginning, also the National Tourism Institute, who collects and manages a lot of funding to promote a more balanced tourism. Lisbon, this is relevant for the discussion, like in a deeper way than Budapest. So the city of Lisbon, which is just a central area of the metropolitan area of Lisbon. So Lisbon is about 3 million. The city of Lisbon is just 500,000. So this almost 3 million basically commute to Lisbon every day, to the city center, or most of them do. And we have a growing tourism. Last year we had over 20 million tourists in Lisbon. And what happens in Portugal, as I imagine you would also find here in Hungary, is that there is a huge difference on the local income, let's call it like the local average salary, and the average salary of those who visit Lisbon as tourists. This is creating, as I imagine also here in Budapest, first, a self-inducted and self-fed inflation, for one, like because prices start to be naturally on the market system established by the capacity of the most rich consumer available. So if a German tourist finds normal to pay 2 euros for a coffee, prices of coffee in Lisbon would grow up to 2 euros, where they would, for proportional to the local salaries, they would be like 25 cents, right? And related to the same process, and you must know this also in Budapest, it's just a matter of scale and how deepened the situation is now in Lisbon. This inflation, how self-feeds the financialization of real estate. So if the prices are going up, this also means that any investment in Lisbon would have a higher profit. And just to give you some numbers, in the last 5 years, real estate prices in Lisbon increased an average of 30% a year. Okay? And again, like between choosing on short or long term, if I'm 60 years old, work in Paris, saved 500,000 euros or 200,000 euros, or I buy a house in the countryside in France where my family comes from, and that house would keep valuing, being possible to sell by 200, or I go to Lisbon, where life is better, weather is better, people are nicer, is way safer, and my 200,000 investment this year would, in a couple of years, value $500,000. So that's what they do. French go and buy houses in Lisbon, by what they can afford, not what local salaries in Lisbon can afford. So we do need tourist input of money, expenditure in Lisbon. We do need the jobs, we desperately need the jobs that they created. The jobs are not necessarily as well paid as the ones we had before the crisis. You probably know this here, also in Budapest. And the market by itself is not correcting or balancing the problem. So, again, please follow the exercise. We have the tourists, we have the commercial tourism, and tourists spend money in hotels, let's say it in Lisbon. They most likely would do it through a international, German, whatever, travel agency, or to booking.com, not following local or European rules and not paying taxes here, paying it somewhere else. Which, just for you to, I don't know, well, booking.com is even a wider phenomenon, although more discreet than Airbnb. And booking.com charges an average of 16% commission, okay? All this money is, we don't know where it's going to, okay? And again, prices are being defined by the financial capability of the tourists, not by local. But anyway, I will try not to repeat myself. Just okay. So the goal is, how can we make benefits of this economy to those organizations, being there not for profit, for profit, but those that would create what I'm calling it a solidarity or collaborative economy. We can call it social. I like to avoid the word social, but it's all right. Which are not enjoying the system. Okay. So those are potential providers. Well, some of those, let's say, social organizations can potentially produce, sell products or services relevant to tourists. And we can help them adapt to do so. Okay? And tourists, tourists, a lot of them, including the German ones, which have some good culture, would even often prefer to choose to spend some money in off-beaten track cultural, sports, recreational activities in Lisbon. Okay, so we believe that for a lot of these tourists, or for a relevant number of these tourists, it is relevant, the idea of a sustainability label, of a community label. As much as we can choose, not a very successfully, but it exists, like if I go on a plane, I can choose to pay extra and to cover my carbon footprint. It's a label. I'm saying I pay myself the compensation of the carbon footprint. Imagine this as a concept of compensating my social impact in the economy of Lisbon. But the difference here is that when we add a label, we are able to often replace, although we are also dealing directly with booking.com and Airbnb to have them in the system. But we can capture value not only for the higher financial capacity of the tourists, but mainly from these huge commissions in the middle. Because people, German tourists, whatever tourists, is now able, through this app and through this platform, to directly choose touristical packages or services by the label the information, with all the, well, I'll get there. So first we create this, what at this diagram is explained as urban cohesion currency mechanism. So this system labels commercial operators like hotels, which are willing to be part of the system by contract, and also to select and contractualize the products and services, so the social economy, which can be part of the system. And we do publicity around Europe and around the world on this information, this data on the services which are available, okay? We call it the smart marketplace, with the labeling the products and services for the users, okay? This is all digital. Then what happens is when a tourist books a room and pays 100 euros, let's just to make the accountability simple, automatically the hotel pays 10%, 10 euros to the system, to the vault of the system, okay? To the trying to remember the name in English. The final slide will have all added information on it. So tourist pays 100, hotel pays 10, gets automatically 10 points from the system. So this is a digital community currency, okay? Translates automatically 10 points, equivalent to 10 euros, back to the hotel or directly to the tourists. The tourist is paying 100 and is basically enjoying a part of the commission that Booking.com or others would normally take, and the hotel is also doing it because it gets promoted and selected because of this label. Then, in reality, what the tourist is doing is buying not just a night at the hotel, but a package of products. But in reality, is not imposed to a selection. He automatically gets a gigantic list of products and services where he can spend the points, okay? Where he can pay with this alternative digital currency. And this is done in a very smart way, because but we'll get there later. So the beneficiary organizations are the ones labeled as where points can be spent, or at least the only ones that can change back the points by euros, okay? That doesn't mean that there are an infinite number of use cases of the currency, but I'll try to make this simple so that I can be understood. The currency will be as free to circulate as euros. It's just on who can, different rates or different commissions to get it changed back into euros, or the available, or which organizations can have this right on changing it back, because the money can circulate as points and then only some, meaning that we are basically channeling consumption to the deprived areas of the city, to organizations who have a positive social impact, like having decent salaries to their employees, or create employment, or create inclusion, or create training and of the community. So those can request reimbursement, and this system has this vault to basically ensures the parity of the euros or the points to the euros. Okay. So, but everyone wins, and that's the, now it starts getting interesting. The tourist gets an offer valuation, meaning that they received personalized by time, thematic, location, and profile data information, meaning that I do check-in at the hotel, it's 7 o'clock, I walk down the hotel, and I automatically get, of course I can do my own search on the app, but I also receive automatically suggestions of places to have dinner where I can pay with points on a walking distance from where I'm standing at the door of the hotel, okay, as an example. Second, the tourist gets a complimentary offer, like off the beaten track, like he would get to know places that he would never go there by traditional information or by international travel agencies that don't know about this depth, especially the non-traditional most tourist points of the city. And of course, one of the things we want is to be able to manage this big number of tourists, is that we need to spread them around the city and not allow them just to be so concentrated in just a few areas of the city. And he would also know directly that he is contributing to the cohesion of the city. I need to shorten the time. The commercial tourist, let's say the hotel, gets client recruitment as much as Booking.com or travel agencies do for them. They get a commercial differentiation, so he has a differentiated factor from his competitors. They have external, meaning international promotion and marketing of their product by being part of the labeled system. And what they basically show themselves as selling is a local authenticity experiential packaging. So they are not just selling a night, they are selling a package. The social economy gets what we call like economic valuation. Basically, they get also client recruitments. They value creation, they create value, they capture value for the local community. They are promoted on social entrepreneurship. And then, of course, tourists would spend often more than the points they have on these locations. And a tourist is also invited to donate, voluntarily donate any points that they don't spend or that they decide not to spend to specific project in the city. And those which are not spent and over time expire, the system creates a fund who then does something useful with them, and we get that there. So the system also uses all this smart cohesion marketplace and all this flow, this real-time data on flows, also evaluated. So we have real-time market data analysis, we have products and services classification by users, like others do, the establishment of awards to social impact initiatives, the smart distribution of tourist flows, offer increment and management. Above all, and this together with going back to your question about the other project, the endogenous resources promotion and valuation. So imagine like on an economic chain is about how much money and how much time and impact does the same money has depending on the time and the speed of his local circulation or going abroad. Like imagine the balance between exportations and importations of a country also applies at a very local level. And this is about how much inputs of money, income, you get into these areas of the city that previously didn't. The most radical now is that all this money is not laying on a bank, okay? It is an investment fund, a social investment fund. As banks, we can use the average currency in circulation amount of money doing smart investments. Smart investments being loaning with no interest to those same social economy funding to help them improve their products and services and creating and enlarge their presence in the economy of the city. And very small numbers, if we get just 1% of what is predicted on success, the amount of money available just in the next 6 months will be 10 million euros. Okay? We'll get to hundreds of millions in 5 years.
Thank you. I think we did challenge a bit our audience with the technical details, but I think there's a question there, but I'm afraid you will have to come for the microphone. I think the important is, and of course we have a very complex system here, the important is to create an alternative, a concurrent to the mainstream mechanisms of well, not only booking accommodation, but also creating all kinds of different services in the city that, of course, enjoy a very high visibility. And of course, everybody starts with Airbnb or booking.com. So we need to create a system that actually brings people to other kinds of services, or uses the commissions in another way. And I think it's, of course, it's like competing with Google, or it's competing with Airbnb, like what Airbnb is trying to do in the same time. So it requires a lot of, you know, lot of craft and energy and investment. But I think it's of course, maybe this sounded a very complex and technical description for me, but I think this is a very legitimate ambition.
So I have two questions, rather issues. The first one is, as I understand it, what you imagine is kind of against the European law, because according to European law, you're not allowed to differentiate in between different member states. The people coming from different member states, and this, it's forbidden. So, no, of course it is. Yes, then, but as I understand, you are talking about always like foreign tourists. No. So you would
anyone who books a hotel, I think.
Okay, so you imagine that, for example, somebody who wants to just of Portuguese would like to come to Lisbon just for the weekend. They would also go through this whole system. This is how you imagine it. Okay. Because how you presented it is that there are these rich people coming from Northern Europe, and therefore they have to.
No, I think there was a joke for Florian, who was sitting there and he's German.
Ah, okay. And so that's one. The second one is that it looks pretty complicated, and I don't really see why you cannot just do this with taxation. I mean, basically, I understand that booking.com is not paying the taxes. Yes, true. And I understand that all the money just flows out to the community and it's never coming back. I understand this. But why cannot you just have some kind of just make them to pay for the tax? Because if you get the data, you know how much they have to pay. And then why don't you just give this money to those communities where you want these people to go, and create on just plain euros, basically such kind of activities that tourists will be happy to go to. I don't really see the point of this very complicated market system, because the invisible hand still kind of works, and then just creating opportunities and touristic attractions on plain euros can also work. No.
Well, first we do have progressive taxes. Okay. They are just not as effective as money is. That's the point. Second, there is not, and there would never be any sort of discrimination. This is a purely voluntary system. The hotels, if they want to use the label, they request it and comply with the rules of the system. This is not mandatory at all. It's like subscribing or not the carbon footprint on a plane. It is purely an option on the commercial operators, on the social economy, and on the tourist itself. What we've understood is that while euros have, well, you don't have euros here, but the point is that a continental currency which has huge advantages, which, and I'm deeply forward the euro, and I would recommend Hungary to use it. The point is that it cannot be fine-tuned to very local needs like this one. You can also not do that with the Hungarian currency. You cannot do that. I mean, from the Budapest perspective. Okay, what this does is create an alternative financial system with a currency, which then, as the commercial banks also can do loans and investments and so forth. But it is one which enjoys the advantages of financial institutions with a very directed purpose. Again, I don't want to convince anybody about this. I hope in a couple of years I can show you how successful and how more successful an instrument like this is than taxes, which we also do. But again, it goes together with what we were talking before, which is this is not owned by the city. This is not owned by the state. This is owned by the federation of those organizations over there. They will use data, real-time data flows on what the tourists are looking for to adapt their own products in an advantage data point of view. It is to use the tools that make capital so successful for some to make it equally or competitively successful or useful for the social economy. It's instead of going against the system, is to use the system.
There's another question behind.
And I'm sorry that the system, well, this diagram is, I know it's too complex. It was never designed to be shown or communicated to the outside, but we still don't have very simplified, friendly, easy to understand versions of it. I'm sorry.
So, Rui, many thanks. It's very interesting what you have been talking about. So you have been talking mainly about two different projects, and they are, it's just a question of an understanding. It is, they vary a little bit. So the first system with the Airbnb, it works from within the Airbnb. That means you forced Airbnb with some negotiations that they make themselves transparent. So you put different kinds of renters, long-term renters and short-term renters, into one basket, and they share within this economy. Okay, maybe the question to this would be how really you were able to force Airbnb. The second is, so UCCM system does not work from within the booking.com. It is a separate...
It also does.
Huh?
It also does.
It also does. Okay, then I misunderstood it. So this is also working through booking.com?
You would have a plugin in booking.com where you download the app as part of booking.com app as an optional. But of course, what we aim is to have the app as many direct users of the app as possible.
Okay, so you did not create a new, say, system for hotels that you have to market extra. So it operates from within the booking.com. But in that sense, you can also use the label also in others, let's say TripAdvisor, etc., and so on. You can also work with other systems like that as well. But you don't create a new system.
Well, we are creating a database, a system of its own, but then we are contractualizing to existing systems as a plug-in within their system.
Okay, now I got it better. Thank you. But how did you force Airbnb? How did you negotiate? I mean, because many cities try and don't get that.
So
really.
On the Airbnb, the answer is simple. We had a huge fight, a huge political fight, and we had to make the government change, the parliament change, and we just now in just September, so it's very, very recent, we were able to force a change in the national law so that the municipalities could only from September to control licensing of short-term rental. What we did in Lisbon since the day one of the law approval was to suspend any new licenses. So we are not licensing short-term rental until we publicly discuss and approve at the City Council and the City Assembly a system like this one. This is one of the proposals which would create a more balanced system. And the answer is Airbnb, if there's not a system which we accept, they will not have licenses. It's as simple as that.
Okay, thank you. If there's anything urgent now to discuss, we would still have a few minutes. Otherwise, I'm really sorry, but we have to close this. I think what we learned, I mean, we will need time to digest. It's a complex mechanism. I think what we learned from today is that within the category that we try to show different progressive policies that deal with housing, that deal with urban planning, that we deal with social and solidarity economy or collaborative economy. I mean, there are many approaches when it comes to existing structures, prohibit, limit, collaborate, hijack, hack, overturn. So there are very different approaches, political approaches that actually are translated into economic or planning approaches. So I think it's been a long day. I think we heard very different approaches, and I really hope that they offer something to take away. And I think it's been for me a very very inspiring and very thought generating discussion. I think, for example, the depth of this proposal also shows that there's been a lot of thinking about this. What we see, for example, in Budapest, that there has been hardly any thinking about this. We have usually 0 options where to host people when, for example, we try to support local economy. Well, directly, we want to make sure that revenue also goes into local projects. There are a lot of thinking about this in Europe, and there are different proposals, different solutions. And I think in a few years we will see what are the more viable options and what are the less viable options, and which are the different legal local contexts that are able to cope with this solution or another. But I would like to thank you very much, Rui, for being with us, and I would like to ask an applause from the audience.